When Adrien Dubois was stopped by police at his own front gate, he didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just made one phone call that turned the whole situation upside down. Adrien Dubois was bone-tired. His hands still smelled faintly of sealant and oak, and his boots were caked with dried mud from the sprawling lot in Winnetka he'd been supervising all day. The sun had disappeared behind the gray Chicago skyline an hour ago, leaving a flat, weary light over the drive home. As he guided his black Lincoln Navigator down the winding road leading to his gated community in Oak Brook, Illinois, all he could think about was a hot shower and the chicken Vesuvio Simone had promised was waiting. Then he saw the squad cars. 2 black and whites, parked diagonally just before his driveway, forming an impassable blockade. Their headlights were off, but both engines were running, a low rumble in the quiet evening. His foot eased off the gas as he slowed, his mind racing with confusion. At first, he assumed it was for someone else, maybe the neighbors. But as he got closer, one of the officers stepped out of his vehicle. "Stay in the vehicle, sir," the cop said, holding up a flat palm. Adrien leaned out the window and gestured calmly toward the black iron gate. "This is my house. I'm just trying to get home." "You live here?" the officer asked, his voice devoid of curiosity. "Yeah," Adrien replied, keeping his own tone steady. "I built this house." The second officer, taller, with a military-style buzz cut and a tense jaw, got out now too, resting one hand near his service belt. Adrien saw the glint of the badge. Sergeant Evan Hayes. The first officer, the one doing the talking, was younger, maybe late 20s. His nameplate read Peterson. "We received a call about a possible break-in," Hayes said, his gaze methodically scanning Adrien from his work boots to his ball cap. "Mind showing us some ID?" Adrien reached into his jacket pocket slowly, deliberately. "Not a problem." Peterson stepped closer, his eyes darting toward the camera mounted on a brick pillar above the gate. "You said you live here?" "I said I built this house. Dubois Construction. Look it up." He handed over his driver's license, which clearly listed the address just a few feet beyond the gate. Hayes took it, examined it for a few seconds, then turned toward Peterson. They didn't move to let him pass. Instead, they just kept standing there, a silent wall of authority. Suspicion hung in the air like the heavy humidity before a Midwest thunderstorm. Adrien tapped a restless rhythm on the side of the SUV. "Look, y'all can check the mailbox. The sign on the gate. Hell, my name is etched on the plaque, right next to the intercom." Peterson didn't respond. He looked down at the license again, then back up at Adrien, as if the pieces of the puzzle weren't fitting together in a way he understood. Suddenly, the grand front door of the house creaked open. A figure stepped out onto the lit porch, waving. "Ade," Simone's voice sliced through the tension. "Is everything okay?" Behind her, their daughter, Chloe, 15 and already as tall as her mom, walked out barefoot, her phone held up in front of her. Simone was still in her nursing scrubs. She looked from the officers to Adrien, her eyes narrowing. "That's my husband. If there's a problem, you can take it up with me." The officers shifted their weight. Hayes handed the license back, his expression unreadable. "We were just responding to a report, ma'am. Just doing our job." Simone didn't blink. "By blocking his own driveway?" Hayes didn't answer that. Instead, he turned, gave Peterson a nod, and both walked back to their cruisers without another word. Adrien finally punched in the gate code, the black iron doors sliding open with a soft, hydraulic hiss. As he drove through, he didn't say anything. Neither did Simone. Chloe just looked down at her phone, her thumb tapping the screen quickly. He parked in front of the garage, but didn't turn off the engine right away. Simone leaned into the passenger window. "You good?" Adrian let out a long, slow breath. "I don't know yet." Inside, he peeled off his boots by the door, sat on the edge of the ottoman, and stared at the hardwood floor. The kitchen smelled of garlic and rosemary, but his appetite had vanished. Chloe walked in, holding her phone. "I recorded the whole thing," she said, "from the moment they got out of their cars." Adrian nodded slowly. "We'll talk about it in the morning." But that night, he barely slept. Something coiled deep inside him wouldn't let him settle. It wasn't just about what happened. It was the chilling fact that it could happen again. That in his own driveway, in front of the home he had designed and built with his own 2 hands, he still had to prove he belonged. He hoped the incident would end there. But what was coming next would make everything far more complicated. What would you have done if you were in Adrian's shoes? At what point does a routine stop cross the line into harassment, especially at the gates of your own home? Adrian was awake before the sun. He hadn't needed an alarm. The weight of the previous night's encounter had pressed on his chest all night, a familiar, suffocating pressure. He watched the ceiling fan spin in the pre-dawn darkness until the room slowly turned from black to gray. Simone stirred beside him. "Get any sleep?" she mumbled. He shook his head, rubbing his tired face. "Not really." By 6:30, he was at the kitchen island, a coffee mug cradled in his hands, staring at the security monitor. He replayed the footage, this time with the audio turned up. There was no shouting, no overt threats, nothing extreme. Just him. Calm, respectful, and cooperative. And still, they had treated him like an intruder on his own land. Simone came in, her hair tied in a messy bun, wearing a hoodie and sweatpants. She opened the fridge, took out a carton of eggs, and started cracking them into a bowl with practiced efficiency. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her back to him. "I'm calling that damn security company," Adrian said, his jaw tight. "Soon as they open, they're the ones who made the call. They have access to the cameras. They didn't even bother to check, just assumed I was up to no good." Chloe wandered in behind them, already dressed for school. She grabbed a granola bar and took a seat at the counter, watching her father. "Are you going to post the video?" she asked. Adrian didn't answer immediately. "No, not yet." Simone glanced up from the sizzling pan. "But we are keeping it." He nodded. "Damn right we are." At 8 o'clock sharp, Adrian dialed the number for Oakbridge Estates Security, the private firm contracted by their HOA to monitor the gates and patrol the neighborhood. A cheerful receptionist answered. Adrian cut straight to the point. "I need to speak to whoever is in charge of dispatch. This is Adrian Dubois from the Highlands section." There was a brief hold. Then a deeper, more formal voice came on the line. "Mr. Dubois, this is Marcus Thorne, head of operations. I understand there was an incident last night. I was actually about to call you." "You had 2 officers blocking my driveway," Adrian said flatly, "with their hands near their weapons. You want to tell me how that happens without a single ounce of verification from your team?" There was a calculated pause. "We received a report from one of our patrol units who spotted suspicious activity near your gate. A male subject, unknown to them, was loitering." "You mean me, the homeowner?" "I understand that now, yes. Our patrol officer didn't recognize you, and because he didn't bother to check the security feed or consult his records," Adrian snapped. "He saw a black man in work clothes and made a judgment call. I assure you, we are reviewing our protocols. This is not how we wish to conduct our relationship with the community." Adrian let out a bitter laugh. "There is no relationship. Not anymore. Another pause. Are you saying you are terminating your contract with us, Mr. Dubois? I'm not saying it, Adrian said. I'm doing it, right now, as of this conversation. Sir, if we could perhaps meet, discuss… Adrian hung up. Simone, now sitting at the kitchen table with her half-eaten eggs, raised an eyebrow. That's it? Done, Adrian confirmed. I'm calling the HOA next. He walked to his home office and pulled up the HOA agreement on his monitor. After a few more calls and a tense but brief exchange with a board member named Paul Miller, who seemed far more worried about the neighborhood's image than Adrian's safety, he made it official. He would no longer contribute a single penny to a security firm that treated him like a threat. By noon, word had started to spread. A friend of Simone's texted. Saw what happened. That was you? Just watched it on a neighborhood Facebook post. Then a message from one of Adrian's subcontractors lit up his phone. Brother, that video is making the rounds. You handled that a lot better than I would have. Adrian frowned and turned to Chloe. Did you post it? She shook her head. No, but I sent it to Naya. Maybe she did. Simone raised an eyebrow. Your friend, Nia? Yeah, Chloe said. She has like 20,000 followers on TikTok. Adrian almost chuckled. He wasn't mad. Not really. Part of him felt a grim satisfaction that it was out there. The other part felt a rising tide of anxiety. He knew that once the internet got a hold of something like this, it ceased to be just a video. It became a story. And sometimes those stories take on a life of their own. Adrian thought it might just blow over. But a knock at his door that evening would change everything. The video was posted without Adrian's consent, but it forced the issue into the open. Do you think Chloe's friend was right to share it publicly? Or should the family have maintained control over the narrative? By 4 p.m., the comments were flooding in faster than Adrian could process them. The footage, less than 2 minutes long, had been clipped, watermarked, and shared across multiple platforms. Chloe's friend had titled the TikTok, "Builder Blocked from Entering His Own $1 Million Home." Guess why? It didn't require much more explanation. People were incensed and intrigued. Some recognized the Oak Brook community, others debated the incident's authenticity. A few pushed back, insisting there had to be more to the story. Adrian sat on his couch, scrolling, feeling half drained and half vibrating with nervous energy. Simone stood behind him, arms folded, reading the screen over his shoulder. Some of these comments, she said quietly, people don't even know you, and they're out here crafting entire narratives. I'm used to that, Adrian replied, his voice rough. People prefer stories that confirm what they already believe. A knock came at the door. 3 firm, deliberate raps. Adrian stood up slowly. You expecting anyone? Simone shook her head. Chloe peeked around the corner from the hallway, her expression curious. Adrian opened the door. Standing on his porch was a woman in her late 60s, clutching a glass dish in both hands like a peace offering. Her silver-white hair was pinned in a neat bun, and she wore a tasteful cardigan over a floral dress. Her eyes looked tired, but unsettlingly direct. Adrian, she said, can I speak with you for a moment? He recognized her. She lived 3 houses down, on the corner. They always exchanged polite waves. They'd never had a real conversation. Sure, he said, stepping back to let her in. She walked into the foyer slowly, as if the floor might shift beneath her. I brought some coffee cake, she offered. It's still warm. Thanks, Simone said from the living room, her eyes watchful and wary. That's very kind of you. I'm Helen Gable. I live on the corner, the woman said, her gaze shifting between Adrian and Simone. I saw the video, and I feel I need to say something." Adrian didn't reply. He just gave a single, curt nod, his face an unreadable mask. Helen looked down at the dish in her hands. "I was the one who called security." Simone sat up straighter. "I saw someone at your gate from my kitchen window. I didn't recognize you at first. You were wearing, I don't know, work clothes, and it was starting to get dark." Adrian blinked slowly. "You didn't recognize me?" I'm sorry," she stammered, her composure beginning to crack. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I never thought the response would be so aggressive. You called on my husband because he looked... What?" Simone stood now, her voice dangerously calm. "Tired? Dirty from a day's work?" "No," Helen said quickly, her cheeks flushing. "No, he looked unfamiliar." "I've lived in this house for 6 years," Adrian stated, his voice flat. "I have attended 3 HOA meetings. I have waved at you and your husband from my truck at least a dozen times. You think I look unfamiliar?" Helen's face was now a deep shade of crimson. "I wasn't thinking clearly. I just saw movement and maybe I panicked." Chloe came out of the hallway now, standing beside her mother. "You panicked because he's black," she said, her voice sharp but quiet. Helen's eyes glistened with tears. "I don't want to believe that's what it was. But maybe, somewhere in my mind, that played a part. I'm not proud of it. I came here because I needed to admit that to you." Adrian finally looked away, staring at the wall. The room was so quiet you could hear the low hum of the refrigerator. "I didn't ask you to come," Adrian said, "but I appreciate that you did." Helen placed the coffee cake on the kitchen counter, her hands shaking. "I just wanted you to know I am truly sorry." Then she turned and walked out, leaving the front door slightly ajar behind her. Adrian stood motionless for a long moment, his mouth pressed into a tight line. Simone moved to his side. "You good?" "I'm not sure yet," he replied. "But that's the second time in 24 hours someone's tried to explain away how they see me." He picked up the coffee cake, looked at it for a second, then set it back down. That night, the video surpassed 500,000 views. Local news stations started calling, asking if Adrian would agree to an on-camera interview. Even a producer from a national network left a voicemail. Simone sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone. "Do you want to say something publicly?" "I don't know," he said. "Feels like whatever I say, somebody will find a way to twist it." "But if you don't say anything," she countered, "people will decide what the story is for you." He didn't answer. He looked out the window instead, toward the gate. But silence wasn't going to be an option much longer, not after what showed up in his mailbox the next morning. Helen came to apologize, but was her apology sufficient? Does admitting to an unconscious bias excuse the damage caused by her actions? What does true accountability look like in a situation like this? The envelope was thick, plain white, and wedged into his mailbox at an odd angle, as if someone had shoved it in with force and haste. Adrian turned it over in his hands. No return address, just his name written in clumsy black ink across the front. Inside was a piece of copy paper with a printed screenshot from the video. His face, captured in mid-conversation with Officer Peterson, had been enlarged. Someone had circled his image with a red marker and scrawled a chilling message across the bottom. "Don't forget whose neighborhood this is." Adrian stood still in the middle of his own driveway, the gravel crunching under his boots as he slowly folded the paper in half. Not torn, not crumpled, just a single, sharp fold. He looked up toward the street, Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. A woman jogged past on the sidewalk. A white Land Rover drove by slowly and turned the corner. Nothing looked suspicious, but an icy dread settled in his chest anyway. Inside, Simone was wiping down the granite countertops. Chloe was upstairs, getting ready for school. Adrian laid the envelope on the island like it was radioactive. "What's that?" Simone asked. He didn't speak, just pushed it across the smooth surface to her. She read the note. Her free hand gripped the edge of the counter. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious." She looked at him, her eyes hard. "You think this came from that security company?" "Could have been anyone," Adrian said, his voice low. "Could be someone on that HOA board. Could be another neighbor." "You think it was her?" Simone asked quietly. "Helen?" Adrian shook his head. "No. She was scared. Ashamed. This is bold. Whoever sent this doesn't feel like they made a mistake. They feel entitled. They want me to feel watched. They want me to feel out of place." Simone's mouth tightened. "We need to file a report." "With who?" Adrian countered. "The same police department that sent Hayes and Peterson to my driveway?" She exhaled, offering no argument. It was a silent acknowledgement between them, a moment where faith in the system felt more like a fairy tale than a viable option. Later that afternoon, Adrian's phone buzzed with a new message. It was from a neighbor named David Chen, who lived 2 blocks over. "Just so you know, there's a thread in the private neighborhood Facebook group. They're trying to organize a vote to reinstate the security contract. Some people are saying you're overreacting, that you're the one making things worse." Adrian called him immediately. "David," he said, "you believe that?" "Of course not," David replied. "But you know how some of these people are. They think if they've never personally seen a problem, it must not exist." Adrian rubbed his temples. "What do they want? For me to just forget about it?" "Yeah," David said, his voice laced with resignation. "They want you to be quiet, composed, grateful." Adrian laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Grateful for what? For the privilege of being interrogated on my own property?" David sighed. "I'm just giving you the heads up, man. This thing's hitting a lot of nerves." "I appreciate it." They hung up. Adrian sat in his office, the blinds cracked just enough to see the perfectly manicured lawns and sculpted hedges lining the cul-de-sac. This was supposed to be the dream, the ultimate reward for decades of hard work, long nights, busted knuckles, and financial risks. He built homes, spending his career helping other people create their sanctuaries. And when it was finally his turn, he chose this place. Top-rated schools, quiet streets, the kind of neighborhood where you were supposed to feel safe. But here he was, questioned at his gate, threatened by anonymous mail, and now being painted as the villain in some perverse drama of suburban harmony. Chloe came downstairs and found him still sitting in the same chair. "You okay, Dad?" He looked up at her. "Do you remember when we first moved here?" he asked. She nodded. "I was in 4th grade. I was so excited to pick my room. You let me paint it purple." She smiled. "Yeah, and then I made you repaint it green 3 months later." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "I want you to understand something. Everything I have ever done, everything your mom and I have worked for, it wasn't just for a nice house. It was to prove something. That we could live where we wanted, how we wanted, that we didn't need anyone's permission." Chloe perched on the arm of the chair beside him. "You don't have to prove anything, Dad." Adrian nodded, slowly. He pulled the folded note from his pocket and stared at it one more time. Just as he was contemplating silence, a phone call later that night made that choice impossible. With the community turning against him and anonymous threats arriving, Adrian's American dream is quickly becoming a nightmare. If you were in his position, would you consider leaving for your family's safety? Or would you stand your ground? The call came just before 10 p.m. Adrian had just locked the back sliding door when his phone buzzed, vibrating insistently against the kitchen counter. He didn't recognize the number, but a feeling in his gut told him to pick up. "Mr. Dubois," a voice said, sharp and a little breathless. "You don't know me, but I saw the video, and I just wanted to say thank you." Adrian paused, thrown off guard. "Who is this?" "I live across town, in Naperville. I'm not from your neighborhood, but I've had things like that happen to me too. Twice. I just never had it on camera. Watching you, watching how you stayed so calm, it meant something. So, thank you." The line went dead before Adrian could respond. He stood there for a second, stunned. The call had lasted less than 30 seconds, but it carried a profound weight. He looked over at Simone, who had just come down the hallway in her robe. "Everything all right?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, just unexpected." But that was only the beginning. Over the next 3 days, the video climbed to over 1.3 million views on various platforms. A reporter from WGN News reached out and came to their home to conduct an interview in their living room. Adrian spoke calmly, focusing on the facts of what had happened without embellishing or leaning into anger. He didn't want to become a symbol. He just wanted to be heard. Still, not everyone appreciated his voice. Unsigned flyers started appearing in neighbors' mailboxes, printed on cheap white paper, accusing Adrian of dragging the community's name through the mud and putting their reputation at risk. One even insinuated that he had staged the entire incident for attention. David Chen texted him a photo of one. "This is some straight-up coward stuff," he wrote. "Not even brave enough to sign their names." Adrian tried to let it roll off his back, but then Simone got a message from her hospital's HR department. They wanted to have a meeting to go over some policy concerns after a patient's family member mentioned they had recognized her from the internet. That was when Adrian had finally had enough. "I stayed calm. I was respectful. And I'm still the problem?" he said, pacing the length of their living room. "People don't want the truth," Simone said, her voice steady. "They want quiet. They want you to be quiet. Because once you start talking, they have to see what they've been ignoring for years." Adrian stopped pacing. "I think I need to go to that HOA meeting." Simone raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" "I'm not going to yell. I'm not going to cause a scene. I'm just going to sit in that room and make them look me in the eye." That Sunday, he dressed in pressed slacks and a collared shirt, not to impress them, but to give them no excuse to divert the focus from the issue at hand. The meeting was in a small rec room off the main clubhouse. About 25 residents sat on folding chairs. Some faces were familiar. Some barely glanced up as he walked in. Paul Miller, the HOA president, stood behind a folding table at the front. His voice wavered for a fraction of a second when he saw Adrian enter. After the usual agenda items, lawn care, pool hours, an update on repairs, Paul cleared his throat. "I think we should address the recent public attention brought on by the events of last week." Adrian raised his hand. "May I speak?" A few heads turned his way. Paul nodded, looking uncomfortable. Adrian stood up slowly. "I'm not here to call anyone out," he began. "I'm here because I believe in this community. It's why I moved my family here. It's why I chose to raise my daughter here. But what happened at my gate last week wasn't just some inconvenience. It was a statement, a loud one." He scanned the room. The moment I'm seen in work boots and a dusty shirt, I suddenly stop looking like I belong. And that is a problem. One woman in the second row shifted uncomfortably in her chair. A man in the back who hadn't looked up once during the meeting now locked eyes with him. I am not asking for anyone's pity, Adrian continued. I'm asking for honesty about how we see each other and about what happens when the people who are supposed to protect us decide to target us based on nothing more than a passing glance. The room was silent. Someone coughed. Paul forced a weak smile. Thank you, Mr. Dubois. We'll take your comments into consideration. Adrian nodded, then sat down. As the meeting adjourned, a few residents approached him. Some shook his hand, while others pointedly avoided him. But one man, a teacher at the local high school, stayed behind. Have you ever thought about coming to speak at the school? He asked. Might do the students some good. Adrian hadn't, but he said he would think about it. Before he could even consider the offer, however, someone else from his past would appear, uninvited, bringing a memory that would stir something far deeper than anger. The HOA meeting became a forum for Adrian's grievance, but it also exposed the deep divisions in his community. It's one thing to face anonymous trolls online, but how do you navigate confronting the prejudice of people you see every day? It was a muggy Wednesday evening when Adrian found himself back at the clubhouse. This time, not for a small HOA meeting, but for something much larger. The HOA board, facing mounting pressure from residents and the ever-growing media attention, had agreed to host a town hall, open to the entire community. People wanted to talk, or at least be seen talking. Adrian didn't want to go, not at first, but Simone had insisted. You've come this far, she'd said. Go say the things they don't want to hear, and say them clearly. So he went. Chloe stayed home, texting him just before he walked inside. Don't let them talk over you, Dad. The room was packed. Folding chairs filled every row, and people stood along the back wall. Local news outlets were there, their cameras discreetly positioned near the exits. Paul Miller opened the meeting with a strained smile and a scripted statement about mutual understanding and moving forward as neighbors. Adrian sat near the front, arms crossed, just listening. When Paul asked if anyone from the community wished to speak, Adrian didn't hesitate. He stood up and walked to the microphone. I already said my piece at the HOA meeting, he began, his voice steady. But I'm starting to realize how many people weren't ready to hear it. I was stopped outside my own home by police who were called by someone in this very community. That is a fact. What I didn't say before, what I haven't told anybody, is that this wasn't the first time something like this has happened to me. He paused, his hands resting lightly on the sides of the podium. 5 years ago, I was working on a job site out in Gurney, supervising a crew for a new development. I left to get lunch. When I came back, I found 2 sheriff's deputies waiting by my truck. Someone had called in a report of a suspicious man walking near the site. I showed them my company badge, my contract, everything. They still ran my plates. They still searched my truck. He looked up, his gaze sweeping the room. Back then, I let it go. I told myself it was just a big misunderstanding, a fluke, but it wasn't a fluke, it was a pattern. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some people nodded, others shifted with discomfort. I'm not here asking for you to feel sorry for me, Adrian said. I am asking you to pay attention. I'm asking you to think twice before you make assumptions about people, because when you get it wrong, the damage doesn't just go away, it lingers. He took a breath. If this community really wants to move forward, we have to stop pretending these things don't happen here. They do. He stepped away from the mic. As he walked back to his seat, a few claps broke the silence. Tentative at first, then stronger. Not everyone applauded, but enough did that he knew he'd been heard. Then a hand shot up in the third row. "Excuse me," a man's voice said. "I have something to say." The crowd turned. It was a man in his mid-50s, with thinning hair, work boots, and a plain gray shirt. Adrian squinted. Something about his face felt familiar. The man walked to the front, ignoring the microphone. "Name's Stan Kowalski. I used to be a foreman for Meyer and Sloan Construction. Long time ago." He turned to face Adrian. "You might not remember me, but we worked one job together, maybe 17 years back, out in Angleton. You were just starting out, a subcontractor back then." Adrian blinked. He did remember. Vaguely. "I was a jerk to you," Stan said, his voice raw. "I didn't let you use the main office trailer. I made you and your crew sit out in the hot sun while everyone else ate inside. And I never told you why." He looked out at the silent crowd. "I told myself it was just a company rule. Separate crews, separate spaces. But the truth is, I didn't want you in that room. I didn't want to explain to the other guys why we had a black contractor at the same table." And there were audible gasps. A few people looked down at the floor, ashamed. "I'm not proud of that," Stan said. "But hearing you speak tonight made me think about that job, and all the ones that came after. I am sorry, man. I should have treated you like a professional, like an equal." Adrian stared at him, saying nothing. He just gave a slow, deliberate nod. That one moment, that public confession landed with more force than any angry speech ever could. Stan walked back to his seat without another word. The silence in the room now felt different, heavier, more real. But as Adrian processed that astonishing apology, a text from Simone buzzed in his pocket, a stark reminder that this fight wasn't just public. It was about protecting his family from whatever came next. Stan's public apology for a racist act committed 17 years prior was a shocking moment. Do you believe such a delayed apology holds value, or is it too little? Too late. Does public confession serve the community, or just the conscience of the person confessing? The message from Simone came just as Adrian was pulling out of the clubhouse parking lot. "Call me when you can. Something happened at school." His heart plummeted. He didn't text back. He hid her name in his call list. She answered on the first ring. "It's Chloe," she said, her voice tight with suppressed anger. "Someone slipped a note into her locker today." Adrian's throat went dry. "What kind of note?" "Nothing graphic, but it was ugly. It said, 'Your daddy's just another loudmouth trying to play the victim.' And it ended with, 'Tell him to be careful where he parks next time.'" Silence stretched between them. Not because there was nothing to say, but because they both knew what this meant. It wasn't just about Adrian anymore. They were coming for his daughter. "Is she okay?" he asked, his voice strained. "She's shaken up," Simone said. "She held it together at school, but she broke down as soon as she got home." Adrian pulled over to the side of the road, the gravel crunching under his tires. He rested his forehead against the cool leather of the steering wheel. His hands were clenched so tightly his knuckles ached. "I'll be home in 10 minutes, he said. Chloe was curled up on the couch when he walked through the door. Her eyes were puffy and red, but she sat up when she saw him. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't want to make things worse." "Baby girl," he said, sitting down beside her and wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You didn't do anything wrong." She leaned against him, her body trembling with a single, shuddering sob. "I don't want to move," she said, her voice muffled by his shirt. "But I don't feel safe here anymore." Adrian swallowed hard. He had heard those same words once before, from a cousin, after a cross had been burned on their lawn when they were just kids. Back then, he hadn't fully understood how someone could come to fear their own street, their own home. Now he knew. He stayed with her on the couch until she drifted off into an uneasy sleep. Later that night, long after he and Simone had gone to bed, Adrian found himself standing alone in the garage. The air smelled of motor oil and sawdust. He stared at his tool rack, at a half-finished cedar planter box he'd started building a month ago but had never finished. He didn't feel rage anymore, not even fear. He just felt an immense, bone-deep exhaustion. He thought back to his early days in construction, driving an old pickup with no air conditioning and a broken window crank. He remembered taking jobs that barely paid for gas, working twice as hard for half the respect. No one questioned him then, not because they respected him, but because they barely even saw him. Now he had the beautiful house, the successful business, the loving family, the life he had built from scratch. And suddenly, everyone had an opinion about him. He remembered it all with a clarity that felt like a fresh wound. And in that moment, he grew tired of being quiet. The next morning, he emailed the reporter at WGN News and told her he wanted a second interview. But this time, not in his living room. He wanted to speak from a job site, in front of his crew, with his company's name on the trailer behind him. Later that week, the reporter met him at a project just breaking ground on the north side of the city. Adrian stood in front of a half-poured foundation, 4 of his guys standing with him. Latino, black, white, all in hard hats and work boots, their faces unsmiling, their presence a silent statement. Staring directly into the camera, Adrian spoke into the mic. "I've worked for 30 years in this city. I've poured foundations, framed houses, and repaired roofs in 100-degree heat. I have earned the right to live where I live." He paused. "But apparently, for some people, that still isn't enough." The video aired that night. It didn't go viral like the first one. It wasn't dramatic, but it was profoundly honest. And more than a few people were paying attention. A local pastor called Simone, asking if Adrian would speak to a youth leadership program. Chloe's school counselor requested a meeting to discuss new strategies for student safety and inclusion. It wasn't a revolution. It was just movement. Slow, but steady. Still, Adrian knew that words and interviews only went so far, especially when he learned what the officers from that night were up to now. When threats escalate to involve one's children, the fight becomes infinitely more personal. How does a parent balance the instinct to protect their child with the need to stand up against injustice? Adrian was in the middle of reviewing blueprints when his phone rang. The caller ID displayed a number he recognized, but had never expected to see. Captain Marcus Vance, Oak Brook PD. Adrian stared at the screen for a few seconds before answering. "Mr. Dubois?" The captain's voice was steady and official. "I'm calling to ask if we might be able to meet, in person, at your convenience." Adrian didn't respond immediately. "Mind telling me why?" "I believe we owe you a direct conversation regarding the officers involved in the incident, and our department's handling of the situation." Adrian leaned back in his office chair. "Are you offering an apology, or are you trying to make this go away?" A beat of silence. "I'm offering an opportunity to talk, face to face. That's all." Adrian agreed, though reluctantly. They met the next afternoon at a coffee shop in Downers Grove, neutral ground. Adrian showed up in his usual work clothes. Captain Vance wore plain clothes, khakis and a button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up as if he were trying to project a casual, approachable air. It didn't work. They shook hands, a brief and formal gesture. I've reviewed the security footage, Vance began after they'd sat down. Multiple times. Adrian remained silent, waiting. I'll be frank. Sergeant Hayes and Officer Peterson violated our department's guidelines for handling non-criminal encounters. There were clear signs of bias and severe procedural lapses. Adrian raised an eyebrow. Is that your official way of saying they messed up? Yes, Vance admitted. They did. And it is being addressed internally. How? They've been temporarily reassigned to administrative duties while we complete the internal investigation. They are not on patrol. Adrian scoffed. So they're still collecting a paycheck. Vance didn't argue the point. Adrian leaned forward. You know what really gets me? If my daughter hadn't recorded it, if that footage didn't exist, you'd be treating me like I imagined the whole thing. Vance gave a slight nod. I understand how it appears. No, Adrian countered, his voice sharp. You don't. You understand how it plays when someone has a recording. That's a different thing entirely. They sat in a tense silence for a moment. Listen, Vance said, his voice lowering. This community is changing. Rapidly. And frankly, we have officers on the force who were not trained to view those changes as a positive thing. I am not making an excuse for their behavior. I am saying we have a lot of work to do. Adrian studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity. Then start with real consequences, he said. Because if all they get is a few weeks of desk duty, then nothing is going to change. Vance nodded again. Understood. The meeting ended cordially enough, but it didn't sit right with Adrian. It felt like a public relations maneuver. A way to say, look, we tried. He walked out of that coffee shop feeling less like a respected citizen and more like a box that had just been checked off a list. That night, Simone was scrolling on her tablet when her expression went rigid. Aid, she said, turning the screen toward him. It was a post from a local police appreciation Facebook page. There was a photo of Sergeant Hayes, smiling, arms crossed, standing with a group of citizens holding signs that read, "We back the badge." The post praised his long years of service and unwavering integrity. Adrian read the caption twice. He's a guest speaker now, he muttered in disbelief. Simone's lips thinned. They didn't sideline him. They rebranded him. Adrian shook his head slowly and stood up. I'm not letting this go. He called a lawyer the next morning. Not to sue, not yet, but to understand his options. If internal disciplinary action was going to be a sham, maybe public pressure would have more teeth. Adrian also reached out to a community advocacy group based in Chicago. He'd spoken with one of their leaders, a sharp, organized woman named Maya Rios, after his WGN segment had aired. They met 2 days later at a small civic center. Maya arrived armed with file folders, statistical printouts, and a tablet loaded with data on local police departments. Look, she said, I'm not here to push you into a fight you don't want. But if you're serious about this, we have to be strategic. Letters to the city council, filing public complaints at oversight hearings. We build pressure in every official room they walk into. Adrian nodded slowly. I've never done anything like this before. You shouldn't have had to, Maya said gently. But now they've made it your fight, too. He took the packet of information she offered him and thumbed through the documents. It was dense, but it was also organized. Names, dates, case histories. Adrian wasn't seeking revenge. He was seeking accountability, not just for himself, but for his daughter, for his crew, for all the young men and women coming up in the trades who would face the same invisible roadblocks without ever knowing what to call them. But as he prepared to turn up the heat, the resistance began to build. and a quiet warning from a familiar voice would make him question just how far he was willing to go. The system offered a token apology while publicly celebrating one of the officers involved. It's a classic case of institutional hypocrisy. When faced with this kind of gaslighting, is it better to fight the system from within or to challenge it loudly from the outside? Adrian never expected to hear from Leo Jackson, not after all these years. They had worked together back in the early 2000s, two ambitious contractors trying to carve out a niche in a market that didn't always welcome them. Leo was older, rougher around the edges, but incredibly savvy. He knew how to navigate the complicated politics of the business, how to speak in code around certain city inspectors, how to charm officials without seeming like he was begging for a chance. So when Leo's name appeared on his caller ID that Friday afternoon, Adrian was caught completely off guard. "Aid," Leo said, dispensing with pleasantries. "Saw your interview. Been following the whole thing." "Appreciate it, Leo." "I admire what you're doing, man. I really do," Leo said. "But I have to ask you, how far are you planning to take this thing?" Adrian didn't have an immediate answer. "Far enough that they don't forget my name the next time they're about to block someone else from getting into their own home." There was a long silence on the line. "I get it," Leo said finally. "I do. But you gotta watch your back. You are rattling cages that have been closed for a long, long time. And this city, it has a short memory but a very long temper." Adrian stayed quiet. "Just think before you burn every bridge," Leo added. "Not all of them deserve to stay standing, but some of them, you might need them again one day." Adrian hung up the phone with a swirl of conflicting emotions. Was that a genuine warning? A favor from an old friend? Or was it just fear masquerading as wisdom? Whatever it was, the path forward wasn't getting any smoother. That evening, Simone came down the stairs, her phone in her hand, her expression grim. "Aid," she said, "you need to see this." It was another social media post from the private neighborhood group. Not so private anymore. A long thread of comments snaked beneath a blurry picture of Adrian's house. "He's always been kind of standoffish. Funny how he never had a problem until he decided he wanted some attention. I don't even feel safe speaking my mind anymore in this neighborhood." And one that made his stomach clench. "It's people like him who end up ruining good neighborhoods." Adrian read them all. Then he scrolled back to the top and read them all again. He recognized some of the names. People who had waved at him as he drove past. People who smiled at him in the grocery store. People who nodded politely at HOA meetings. And now, they didn't even bother to hide their contempt. Simone lowered her voice. "I think we need to talk about leaving." Adrian looked at her, stunned. "Leave the house?" She nodded. "Just for a few weeks. Maybe go see your sister in Waco. Just give things time to die down." Adrian shook his head slowly, resolutely. "No, they don't get to run us out of the home we built." "Aid, I am not talking about surrendering," she pleaded. "I am talking about keeping Chloe safe. I'm talking about our sanity." He clenched his jaw. "I understand that," he said. "But if we disappear now, they win. The person who sent that note, the people who think I'm just making noise, they all win." Simone let out a long, weary sigh. "I know, I don't want to watch this thing eat you alive." He didn't sleep that night. Around 2 a.m., he was sitting in the garage again, staring at that unfinished planter box. The raw, exposed wood felt like a reflection of how open and vulnerable everything had become. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. A new email from Maya Rios, the advocate. FYI. Found a complaint filed against Officer Peterson 2 years ago. Nearly identical pattern. Man pulled over in his own driveway in front of his home. No charges filed, but no follow-up either. I'm sending you the documents now. Adrian stared at the screen. There it was. Confirmation. It wasn't just him. He clicked open the attached file and read the summary. Different man, different street. Same story. The officer didn't recognize the homeowner, assumed the worst, and escalated the situation. And then, no apology, no official record of discipline. Raymond forwarded the file to his lawyer. Then he saved it to his hard drive. Twice. Enough was enough. By morning, his mind was clear. With Maya's help, he scheduled a press conference. It wouldn't be flashy, just a simple statement delivered on the steps of City Hall. But he was going to name names. He was going to say, plainly and clearly, what the system refused to admit on its own. Simone stood beside him on that day, her hand holding his tightly. Chloe watched from the back of the small crowd, flanked by two of her friends. Adrian's construction crew even showed up, still in their dusty work shirts and steel-toed boots, ready to back their boss no matter what. He spoke calmly, firmly, with no hint of anger in his voice. "This isn't just about me," he said. "It's about patterns. It's about accountability. And it's about what happens when silence is no longer an option." Some people clapped. Others just stood still, watching. But now, they were listening. And as Adrian stepped away from the microphone, he knew the fight was far from over. But what came next would finally begin to shift the story from one of reaction to one of action. 2 weeks later, Adrian stood at the front of a high school auditorium in nearby Bolingbrook, looking out at hundreds of teenagers. Behind him, a large banner read, "Voices of Leadership, Building Integrity from the Ground Up." He wasn't used to this kind of audience. There were no blueprints rolled out in front of him, no crew awaiting instructions, just young, open minds looking for something real. He cleared his throat and adjusted the mic. "When I was your age," he began, "I thought success meant proving people wrong. It meant working harder, staying quieter, and never complaining when things felt unfair. I thought if I just kept my head down long enough, I would eventually earn respect." He paused, letting the words sink in. But respect doesn't always follow hard work. Not when the people watching you have already made up their minds about who you are. The auditorium was completely silent. "I built my business with calloused hands and 4 a.m. starts. I built my home with pride. But I still got stopped by police at my own gate. I still had to explain myself as if I didn't belong. That's not just about race, it's about perception. And when you don't control your own narrative, believe me, someone else will write it for you." A hand shot up in the third row, a lanky student with a notebook in his lap. "Do you think speaking out made things worse?" he asked. "Like, would it have just been easier to let it all go?" Adrian didn't even have to think about it. "It might have been easier," he admitted. "But it wouldn't have been right. Silence might protect you for a day, but it leaves the next person who looks like you completely vulnerable tomorrow." He glanced toward the back of the auditorium, where Chloe and Simone sat, listening intently. He smiled a small, tired smile. "I didn't speak out to become a hero. I did it because my daughter has to live in the world we all help shape. And if I let someone treat me like a stranger in my own driveway, what message am I sending to her?" The applause started slowly at first, then grew, steady and heartfelt. Afterwards, a small group of students gathered around him. One young girl with braids and braces told him her older brother had gone through something similar in Sugar Land. Another student said his mother was often afraid to speak up at her job, but he was going to show her Adrian's interview. It wasn't a viral moment. It wasn't trending on TikTok. But it was something better. It was real connection. Outside the school, Adrian stood near his navigator while Simone handed Chloe a bottle of water. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement. "You did good," Simone said, walking up beside him. Adrian exhaled slowly. "I was nervous. Kids are a tougher crowd than contractors," she laughed. Then her expression turned serious. "You know this isn't over, right? There will still be resistance." "I know," he said. "But I'm not fighting it alone anymore." That night, Adrian finally finished the cedar planter box in the garage. He lined it with fresh soil, planted lavender and sage, and placed it proudly by the front porch. The next morning, neighbors walked by on their morning strolls. Some waved. One even stopped to compliment the flowers. Adrian didn't wave back out of simple habit anymore. He did it with purpose. Because if they were going to see him, they were going to see all of him. The builder, the father, the husband, the man who stayed. The officers? Sergeant Hayes quietly resigned from the department 3 months later. Officer Peterson was permanently transferred to a desk job, pending a new civilian oversight policy the city council was now debating. There was no grand gesture of victory, no dramatic ending. Just change. Slow, forced, but real. The private security firm did not have its contract renewed. And the HOA? Well, elections were coming up, and Adrian's name had already been nominated for the board. He hadn't accepted the nomination yet, but he was thinking about it. Because sometimes the only way to truly fix a broken gate is to hold the key yourself. Let this be a reminder. Where you live should never determine how you are treated. What you wear should never change how you are seen. And while silence may keep things calm, it never makes things right. Adrian's story began with a blocked gate, but ended by opening a new door for his community. Would you have spoken up? What does it take to stand your ground when it feels like the world is trying to push you out? If this story meant something to you, share it. Let's continue to challenge the silence, one voice at a time.